There is no need to have weapons of war in civilian hands.
People in America will not, like Australia, give up their guns.
The issue of gun control is a weapon in itself, right at the heart of American politics since the very beginning. These days, it's as much about money and power as it is about saving lives. Increasingly, it's a debate with global impact.
What's going on, my people? This is Blanche Eden, your host for Black Trending News. This is episode number 26 today. And today we're going to be talking about gun laws. And, I want to go over a timeline dating all the way back to the 1700s and some important times in between then, when gun laws started and what were some of the highlights in that political circle. There's been some, I'm not going to get into the recent tragedies. We've all heard it. I don't want to get into it, but, my condolences to the families and friends of those that were lost. But I don't want to go into those because we've been told about them enough. I think what we need to know about is how we can change the laws. Election season is coming up. It's around the corner. It's a few months away. So what can we do between now and then if we haven't done anything already to change the laws? And that is educating ourselves about the laws. Not enough people know about gun laws, including myself. So let's learn today. Let's read. Let's get to know what we can do in our communities and in our states, because each state has different laws. So if everybody comes together in their state on what they can do in their state with gun laws, they can make change. But we can't make change by retweeting. We can't make change by crying about it. We can't make change by sighing about it. We have to make change by changing the laws. I know it's a long podcast, but trust me, it's going to be a good podcast. Lots of information. Stick around, even if you got to watch half of it now, watch half of it later. It's definitely some great information to use when you're going to be voting. Even if you're not going to vote, you can still use this information to try to change what's going on. If you don't like what's going on around you, the only way to change it is through the judicial system. So let's get into it. Now, most people know what the Second Amendment is, right? But let's go over it again, just for those who don't know or need a little clarity. The Second Amendment to the United States Constitution protects the individual right to keep and bear arms, which are guns. It was ratified on December 15th, 1791, as part of the Bill of Rights. In District of Columbia versus Heller in 2008, the Supreme Court affirmed for the first time that the right belongs to individuals exclusively for self-defense in the home, while also including, as dicta, that the right is not unlimited and does not preclude the existence of certain long-standing prohibitions, such as those forbidding the possession of firearms by felons and the mentally ill, or restrictions on the carrying of dangerous and unusual weapons. State and local governments are limited to the same extent as the federal government from infringing this right. So I want to make a note here that the Second Amendment was made in 1791, and then in 2008, they decided on this. How many years have gone by until they decided that, the possession of firearms by felons and the mentally ill, or putting restrictions on them? So there was a long time before this took place. The Second Amendment was based partially on the right to keep and bear arms in English common law and was influenced by the English Bill of Rights of 1689.
New Zealand has endured its darkest day. At least 40 people have been killed and dozens more injured in a terror attack as unprecedented as it is depraved.
The terrorist attack on 2 mosques in Christchurch sent shockwaves around the world. In the wake of the atrocity that left 50 innocent worshippers dead, the Prime Minister of New Zealand was quite clear on what would happen next.
Obviously, I think people will be seeking change, and I'm committing to that.
In less than a week, Jacinda Ardern took decisive steps to change the gun laws. An attack like this could never happen again. New Zealand would follow the path taken by Australia following the Port Arthur massacre in Tasmania in 1996. Semi-automatic rifles, pump-action shotguns and semi-automatic shotguns were outlawed. Universal requirements for registration and licensing were brought in. A shooting at Monash University in 2002 would see further restrictions which all but banned handguns. Since Port Arthur, tens of thousands of firearms have been destroyed and the number of gun-related deaths has fallen considerably. In the United States, it's a different story. More guns are privately owned than there are people, and the number of gun-related deaths has been on the rise for decades.
In the United States, access to guns is controlled by law under a number of federal statutes. These laws regulate the manufacture, trade, possession, transfer, record-keeping, transport, and destruction of firearms, ammunition, and firearms accessories. They are enforced by state agencies and the Federal Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, or ATF. In addition to federal gun laws, all state governments and some local governments have their own laws and regulate firearms. The right to keep and bear arms is protected by the Second Amendment to the United States Constitution. Now, there are people who are eligible, right? Let's go over the people that are eligible to own and possess firearms. Citizens of the United States, nationals but not citizens of the United States, lawful permanent residents of the United States, commonly known as green card holders, aliens who have been lawfully admitted to the United States under a non-immigrant visa. They must fall under certain exceptions in that case. Each state has its own laws regarding who is allowed to own or possess firearms, and there are various state and federal permitting and background check requirements. Controversy continues over which classes of people, such as convicted felons, people with severe or violent mental illness, and people on the federal no-fly list, should be excluded. Laws in these areas vary considerably, and enforcement is in flux. Okay, notice it said should be excluded. Okay, some ineligible people who are not allowed to possess firearms, guns. Under the Gun Control Act, it is unlawful for people convicted in any court of a crime punishable by imprisonment or a term exceeding 1 year who is a fugitive from justice. Any person under indictment for a crime punishable by imprisonment for a term exceeding 1 year who is an unlawful user of or addicted to any controlled substance. Someone who has been agitated as a mental defective or has been committed to any mental institution, who is an illegal alien, who has been discharged from the armed forces under dishonorable conditions, who has renounced his or her United States national citizenship, who is subject to a court order restraining the person from harassing, stalking, or threatening an intimate partner or a child of the intimate partner, or who has been convicted of a misdemeanor crime or domestic violence. Now, according to the U.S. Sentencing Commission, approximately 5,000 to 6,000 people a year are convicted of receiving or possessing a firearm against one of the prohibitions above. In 2017, over 25.2 million actual background checks were performed in total. Are we hearing this? Are we listening to this? I'll say it again. 5,000 to 6,000 people were convicted of receiving or possessing a firearm against one of the prohibitions. 5,000 to 6,000 people were caught. That means that they were able to buy it because they were caught doing the wrong thing. So that's 5,000 to 6,000 people. Okay? And in 2017, over 25.2 million actual. 25.2 million actual background checks were performed to buy guns. What do 25.2 million people need guns for? I just don't quite understand, right? These numbers are astounding and they are very questionable. Very questionable. 25.2 million people in 1 year. Really? All right. Are even 25 million people born a year? These numbers are just astounding.
In America, almost 40,000 people were killed by a firearm in 2017. A Gallup poll that year showed 60% of Americans wanted stricter gun laws. 75% wanted to see a 30-day waiting period for a gun, and 96% wanted universal background checks. So what's stopping the United States from taking action? The short answer is this group, the National Rifle Association, one of the most powerful political lobby groups in the world. The NRA is pro-guns and very effective at being anti-politicians who aren't. And it's been around a long time. Formed in 1871, it's actually older than 12 of America's 50 states, and over the years has arguably had more say in elections than half the population. Women were only given the right to vote in 1920 when America passed the 19th Amendment. But when it comes to amendments, the NRA is much more interested in protecting the second, the right to bear arms. Signed by the Founding Fathers, it's been part of the American Constitution since 1791. It's this short line of text the NRA uses to try and stop changes to the gun laws.
Okay, so let's get into the nitty-gritty of this. Let's get into the timeline, starting back in 1791 when the Bill of Rights, including the Second Amendment. So in 1791, basically the right to bear arms was made. The time was different. It was a different time in the world in 1791. So do I feel like the Second Amendment should be changed? I think it should be altered because our society is different. So to hold on to the Second Amendment because it was made in 1791, hundreds of years ago, and do we still need to have this? I think it needs to be updated. I think it definitely needs to be updated. 25.2 million background checks for guns in 1 year. Let's really go out. What's going on? Georgia passes in 1837. Georgia passes a law banning handguns. The law is ruled unconstitutional by the U.S. Supreme Court and is thrown out. So apparently times have changed, right? Almost 100 years later or something like that. People were like, look, this gun thing is getting out of control. We want to ban guns. And you can see that it was thrown out because it was ruled unconstitutional. This is just ridiculous. Why wasn't that considered? If Georgia felt like they didn't need guns, then why wasn't that considered? Why wasn't it taken seriously? In 1865, in a reaction to emancipation. Emancipation was the time after slavery when blacks began to, come into voting and, segregation was beginning, racism, lynching. In a reaction to emancipation in 1865, several southern states adopt black codes, which, among other things, forbid black persons from possessing firearms. So you have to ask yourself, how important was the Second Amendment and why didn't it apply to everybody? Well, they didn't consider blacks as U.S. citizens. What was it? We were good enough to build this country and create profit for many, 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 many slave masters, but we weren't worthy enough to be able to be considered in a Second Amendment. So you have to ask yourself, who is this really for? A few years later, in 1871, the National Rifle Association, or the NRA, is organized around its primary goal of improving American civilians' marksmanship in preparation for war. Okay. In 1927, the U.S. Congress passes a law banning the mailing of concealable weapons. In 1934, the National Firearms Act of 1934 regulated the manufacture, sale, and possession of fully automatic firearms like submachine guns is approved by Congress. So they legalized the sale and possession of fully automatic firearms like a submachine gun. That was okay to manufacture, sell, and possess in 1934. A submachine gun, an automatic firearm submachine gun. Here we go. In 1938, the Federal Firearms Act of 1938 placed the first limitations on selling ordinary firearms. Persons selling guns are required to obtain a federal firearms license. This is in 1938, okay? 1791 is when the Second Amendment was created, and 1938 was when it was necessary to have a license. And at that time, it cost $1 a year to maintain records of the name and address of persons whom firearms were sold. Gun sales to persons convicted of violent felonies were prohibited. Violent felonies. Violent felonies, not other felonies, just violent ones. So again, that's a big gray area. That's a big gray area. And again, that's a long time before you needed a license. It should have been did that, right? 1968, the Gun Control Act of 1968 was enacted for the purpose of keeping firearms out of the hands of those not legally entitled to possess them because of age, criminal background, or incompetence. The act regulates imported guns, expands the gun dealer licensing and record keeping requirements, and places specific limitations on the sale of handguns. The list of persons banned from buying guns is expanded to include persons convicted of any non-business related felony, persons found to be mentally incompetent, and users of illegal drugs. 30 years later, how many lives later they expanded it? Look on social media, people. Do we really have 30 years to spare here? We have to learn the law so that we can make changes in our community and in our lives, right? In 1972, the Federal Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, ATF, is created, listing as part of its mission the control of illegal use and sale of firearms and the enforcement of federal firearms laws. ATF issues firearms licenses and conducts firearms licensee qualification and compliance inspections. These are the people who are in control of giving out these licenses to people, doing their background checks. At 25.2 million background checks that were done back in 2017. 25.2 million background checks. What is that? Half the country? Somebody tell me. Put that in the comment section. How many people is that? In 1977, the District of Columbia enacts as anti-handgun law, which also requires registration of all rifles and shotguns within the District of Columbia. Let me read that again. In 1977, the District of Columbia enacts an anti-handgun law, which also requires registration of all rifles and shotguns within the District of Columbia. So you must register all of your guns. They need to know, correct me if I'm wrong in the comment section, but what I understand from this is that in 1977, so previous to 1977, you could have had 300 guns and you didn't have to tell anybody. But in 1977, about 200 years later, you had to tell, hey, I got 300 guns and I want another 50 more for whatever reason. Okay? That's a big deal. I think that's important. And that was long overdue. In 1986, the Armed Career Criminal Act increased penalties for possession of firearms by persons not qualified to own them under the Gun Control Act of 1986. The Firearms Owner Protections Act relaxes some restrictions on gun and ammunition sales and establishes mandatory penalties for use of firearms during the commission of a crime. The Law Enforcement Officers Protection Act banned possession of cop killer bullets capable of penetrating bulletproof clothing. Wow. In 1986. Okay, so these laws were taking some time. They were dragging and taking some time. I guess, again, lives have to be taken. These things have to happen. And then they go, okay, well, let's change it 30 years later or 10 years later. Like, it's just, it takes a long time, it seems. And people are just dropping like flies. And it's because the laws are not strict enough. Okay, it says the Firearms Owners Protection Act relaxes some restrictions on gun and ammunition sales. Relaxes. All right,
A sunset clause on this ban meant that 10 years later, George W. Bush was in a position to relax the law and assault weapons were back. A huge victory for the NRA. It's a classic example of how effective it is as a political organisation. As the NRA Director of Grassroots openly admits, their job is to replace anti-gun lawmakers with pro-gun lawmakers. That is where it focuses its considerable support and money. When it comes to elections, millions of dollars are spent on supporting pro-gun candidates like Donald Trump, and even more on opposing anti-gun candidates like Hillary Clinton. Active opposition is big business. In the 2018 Senate race, the NRA Political Action Committee spent more than $1 million in Indiana, successfully opposing Joe Donnelly, who lost his seat in the Senate to the pro-gun Mike Braun. Influencing lawmakers at state level is just as important to the NRA as who sits in Washington, if not more so, as state laws are more relaxed and state law enforcement is not required to enforce federal gun laws.
In 1989, California bans the possession of semi-automatic assault weapons following the massacre of 5 children on a Stockton, California school playground. So here we go. These massacres have been happening since the 80s. I didn't even know that. So newsflash, 1989, maybe that was the first one, maybe it wasn't. Who knows, right? But in 1989, California had an issue. 5 kids were killed in a playground. And previous to 1989, people were allowed to possess semi-automatic assault weapons. What? All right, so after those 5 kids were killed, then they ban it. In 1990, the Crime Control Act of 1990 banned manufacturing and importing semi-automatic assault weapons in the U.S. Gun-free school zones are established, carrying specific penalties for violations. So now people are waking up like, oh man, we need to, but that was only a year later, right? So that's not too bad, right? So they acted quicker than 30 years as they did in the past, right? Because something tragic happened. Parents probably got out there, fought, voted, changed things. So now we had a change within a year. That's good. That's what we have to do, okay? In 1994, the Brady Handgun Violence Prevention Act imposed a 5-day waiting period on the purchase of a handgun and required that local law enforcement agencies conduct background checks on purchasers of handguns. In 1994, 1791, 1994. The Violent Crime Control and Law Enforcement Act of 1994 prohibited the sale, manufacture, importation, or possession of a number of specific types of assault-type weapons for a 10-year period. However, the law expired on September 13th, 2004 after Congress failed to reauthorize it. So, there we go. There's no 5-day waiting period as of 2004. That required, that changed, that, blah, blah, blah. Whatever they meant to do, it wasn't reauthorized. I wonder why. In 1997, the U.S. Supreme Court, in the case of Prince versus United States, declared the background check requirement of the Brady Handgun Violence Prevention Act unconstitutional. The Florida Supreme Court upholds a jury's $11.5 million verdict against Kmart for selling a gun to an intoxicated man who used the gun to shoot his estranged girlfriend. Kmart sold a gun to an intoxicated man who shot his estranged girlfriend in Florida. Major American gun manufacturers voluntarily agreed to include child safety trigger devices on all new handguns. That happened in 1997. Those are major things that happened in 1997. 1998, in June, a Justice Department report indicates the blocking of some 69,000 handgun sales during 1977 when the Brady Bill pre-sale background checks were required. 69,000 hand sales during 1977. In October of 1998, New Orleans becomes the first U.S. city to file suit against gun makers, firearms trade associations, and gun dealers. The city's suit seeks recovery of costs attributed to gun-related violence. In July 1998, an amendment requiring a trigger lock mechanism to be included with every handgun sold in the U.S. is defeated in the Senate. Defeated. But the Senate approves an amendment requiring gun dealers to have trigger locks available for sale and creating federal grants for gun safety and education programs. So they made the money off of it, right? You can buy this lock. We make this lock optional, but you don't have to get it. If you want it, you got to pay us for it. It just doesn't make any sense. And kids are, we've seen it. Kids accidentally killing themselves with guns that they find, they play with, and boom, that's it. Just takes a moment. Sad. In 1998, November 12th, Chicago, Illinois files a $433 million suit against local gun dealers and makers alleging that oversupplying local markets provided guns to criminals. This is very important. In Chicago, Chicago was known for being very violent. Some parts of Chicago were extremely violent, extremely impoverished, extremely violent. And they filed a $433 million suit against local gun dealers and makers, alleging that oversupplying local markets provided guns to criminals. Oversupplying. I can't make this up. In 1998, on November 17th, a couple days later, a negligence suit against gun maker Beretta, brought by the family of a 14-year-old boy killed by another boy with a Beretta handgun, is dismissed by a California jury. Dismissed. In 1988, November 10th, President Ronald Reagan signs the Undetectable Firearms Act of 1988, making it illegal to manufacture, import, sell, ship, deliver, possess, transfer, or receive any firearm that is not as detectable by walk-through metal detectors. So previous to 1988, it wasn't such. And then in 1988, he made that change. The law prohibited guns not containing enough metal to trigger security screening machines found in airports, courthouses, and other secure areas accessible to the public. Can you believe that? You see, you gotta read, people. You gotta learn. You gotta listen. You gotta learn. And you gotta read. There were guns that did not include enough metal in them to be picked up by metal detectors. Who would have thought? Who would have thought? Right? Who would have thought? Not many people. That's something I never knew. 1998, November 30th, permanent provisions of the Brady Act go into effect. Years later, gun dealers are now required to initiate a pre-sale criminal background check of all gun buyers through the newly created National Instant Criminal Background Check, NICS, computer system. In 1998, December 1st, the NRA files suit in federal court attempting to block the FBI's collection of information on firearm buyers. Okay? They wanted to block it.
When it comes to fighting for their rights, donations certainly count. But the NRA has additional firepower in its arsenal: active members. At a grassroots level, NRA members write to their representatives and push their case hard.
We will never back away from our resolve to defend our rights and the rights of all law-abiding American gun owners.
The NRA relies on the Second Amendment to defend existing gun laws, but changes to the Constitution are not unheard of. In 1919, the 18th Amendment was introduced to ban alcohol. That amendment was repealed in 1933. These days, it's hard to imagine many NRA members objecting to the end of prohibition. The bigger challenge to those wanting to tackle gun laws is proliferation. Americans own more than 393 million firearms. That's more than enough guns to arm every man, woman and child. And almost half the total number of guns owned by civilians in the entire world.
1998, December 5th, President Bill Clinton announces that the instant background check system had prevented 400,000 illegal gun purchases. The claim is called misleading by the NRA. All right. 1999, on May 20th, by a 51-50 vote, with the tiebreaker vote cast by Vice President Al Gore, the U.S. Senate passes a bill requiring trigger locks on all newly manufactured handguns and extending waiting period and background check requirements to sales of firearms at gun shows. Nice one. At the gun shows. Okay, what about other places? They're trying. You could see that they're trying to be creative, right? Because people do go to gun shows. So maybe we could fight it over there if we can't fight it other ways, right? They're trying. I see efforts by Vice President Al Gore and whoever else was in office at that time in 1999. In 1999, April 20th, at Columbine High School near Denver, students Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold shoot and kill 12 other students and a teacher, and wounding 24 others before killing themselves. The attack renewed debate on the need for more restrictive gun control laws. Yeah, I think so. In 1999, in January, before that, civil suits against gun makers seeking to recover costs of gun-related violence are filed in Bridgeport, Connecticut, and Miami-Dade County, Florida. People are suing. They're going to court with it. That's the only place you can make these changes, is in the Justice Department. okay, in the big house. So in 1999, in August, the Los Angeles County, California Board of Supervisors votes 3-2 to ban the Great Western Gun Show, billed as the world's largest gun show, from the Pomona, California fairgrounds, where the show had been held for the last 30 years. Okay, so they're trying. In 2004, September 13th, after lengthy and heated debate, Congress allows the 10-year-old Violent Crime Control and Law Enforcement Act of 1994, banning the sale of 19 types of military-style assault weapons to expire. Okay. Why do we need 19 types of military-style assault weapons available to people? I just don't understand. If it's not a war going on, if you're not out away from civilians, what do you... I mean, even if you are around civilians, those are some bad weapons that happen around people, civilians, anybody. In 2004, in December, Congress fails to continue funding for President George W. Bush's 2001 gun control program, Project Safe Neighborhoods. Fails to continue funding for it. Fails to continue funding. No money for the laws that are going to protect neighborhoods. Massachusetts becomes the first state to implement an electronic instant gun buyer background check system with fingerprint scanning for gun licenses and gun purchases. People are trying. By the state. That's in Massachusetts, right? States. So wherever you live, you have to be concerned with the laws in your state. And that's all right. Nobody's asking anybody to change laws for the whole country. Just work on your state where you live. In 2005, in January, California bans the manufacture, sale, distribution, or import of the powerful .50 caliber BMG or Browning machine gun rifle. Previous to 2005, this was available. Why? I don't get it. In 2005, in October, President Bush signs the Protection of Lawful Commerce in Arms Act, limiting the ability of victims of crimes in which guns were used to sue firearms manufacturers and dealers. The law included an amendment requiring all new guns to come with trigger locks. 2008, in January, in a move supported by both opponents and advocates of gun control laws, President Bush signed the National Instant Criminal Background Check Improvement Act, requiring gun buyer background checks to screen for legally declared mentally ill individuals who are ineligible to buy firearms. In 2008. I think that took too long. I don't know about you, but I think that took too long. That should have been the first thing. One of the first things that were done. But of course that would cut sales. Moving along, in June 26, 2008, in its landmark decision in the case of District Columbia versus Heller, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that the Second Amendment affirmed the rights of individuals to own firearms. The ruling also overturned a 32-year-old ban on the sale or possession of handguns in the District of Columbia. Okay. 2010, in February, a federal law signed by President Barack Obama takes effect, allowing licensed gun owners to bring firearms into national parks and wildlife refuges as long as they are allowed by state. Allowing licensed gun owners to bring firearms into national parks and wildlife refuges as long as they are allowed by state. Okay. In 2013, 3 years later. 3 years later. It's a long time. A lot of lives. That's a lot of lives. Okay, in 2013, December 9th, the undetectable firearms of 1988 required that all guns must contain enough metal to be detectable by security screening machines as extended through 2035. Now, they did this already. They did it already. I guess they needed to do it again. I don't know. Maybe it didn't work the first time. Who knows? But they had to do it again. They had to enforce it again. Okay, 2015, July 29th, in an effort to close the so-called gun show loophole, allowing gun sales conducted without Brady Act background checks, U.S. Rep. Spear Jackie introduced the Fixed Gun Checks Act of 2015 to require background checks for all gun sales, including the sales made over the internet at gun shows. So previous to 2015, people weren't required to do a background check when they bought it online. Hello? Hello. In 2016, June 12, President Obama again called on Congress to enact or renew a law prohibiting the sale and possession of assault-style weapons and high-capacity ammunition magazines after a man identified as Omar Mateen killed 49 people in an Orlando, Florida gay nightclub on June 12 using an AR-15 semi-automatic rifle. In a 911 call he made during the attack, Mateen told police he had pledged his allegiance to the radical Islamic terrorist group ISIS. That's irrelevant. It really is. That last sentence is irrelevant. What is relevant is that he owned assault-style weapons, ammunition magazine, high-capacity ammunition magazines. He killed 49 people, probably within moments, not minutes, moments. He again called on Congress to enact or renew a law prohibiting the sale and possession. He had to call on Congress again. So in September 2017, a bill titled Sportsman Heritage and Recreational Enhancement Act, or SHARE Act, okay, the main purpose of this bill was to expand access to public land for hunting, fishing, and recreational shooting. Okay. A provision was added by Representative Jeff Duncan of South Carolina called the Hearing Protection Act. It would reduce the current federal restrictions on purchasing firearm silencers or suppressors. Currently, the restrictions on silencer purchases are similar to those for machine guns, including extensive background checks, waiting periods, and transfer taxes. Representative Duncan's provision would eliminate those restrictions. Duncan, his name is Jeff Duncan, okay? He eliminated the restrictions on silencer purchases. I don't know what to say. I don't know what to say. I don't know what to say. I'm just the messenger. Backers of Duncan's provision argue that it would help recreational hunters and shooters protect themselves from hearing loss. Opponents say it would make it harder for police and civilians to locate the source of gunfire, potentially resulting in more casualties. Witnesses to the deadly mass shooting in Las Vegas on October 1st, 2017 reported that the gunfire coming from the 32nd floor of the Mandalay Resort sounded like popping. That was at first mistaken as fireworks. Many argue that the inability to hear the gunshots made the shooting even more deadly. Okay. And this is in 2017. This is 2 years ago, if that. Okay. A silencer, a silent gun. I gotta move on to the next one here. So on October 1st, 2017, barely a year after the Orlando shooting, a man identified as Stephen Craig Paddock opened fire on an outdoor music festival in Las Vegas, shooting from the 32nd floor of the Mandalay Bay Hotel. Paddock killed at least 59 people and wounded more than 500 others. One man. Among the at least 23 firearms found in Paddock's room were legally purchased semi-automatic AR-15 rifles, which had been fitted with commercially available accessories known as bump stocks, which allow semi-automatic rifles to be fired in fully automatic mode of up to 9 rounds per second. Under a law enacted in 2010, bump stocks are treated as legal aftermarket accessories. Legal. Did he do anything illegal besides kill those people? Because everything he bought was legal. This is what I'm talking about. In the aftermath of the incident, lawmakers on both sides of the aisle have called for laws specifically banning bump stocks, while others have also called for renewal of the assault weapons ban. But that's all they did. They just did this because of that incident. What about everything else? What about other things that need to be changed? It's like they're working on one thing at a time, but there's a billion things going on. Less than a week after the Las Vegas shooting, U.S. Senator Dianne Feinstein of California introduced the Automatic Gunfire Prevention Act that would ban the sale and possession of bump stocks and other devices that essentially turn a semi-automatic weapon to fire in fully automatic mode. Less than a week, she did this. In less than a week. Okay? She took action. But why did it have to be so tragic? It had to be so tragic for this to happen. It should have just happened. It should have just happened. These things should not be allowed. Why did it take so many people? Quote, "It shall be unlawful for any person to import, sell, manufacture, transfer, or possess in or affecting interstate or foreign commerce a trigger crank, a bump fire device, or any part, combination of parts, component, device, attachment, or accessory that is designed or functions to accelerate the rate of fire of a semi-automatic rifle but not convert the semi-automatic rifle into a machine gun," the bill states. All right. In October 5th, 2017, U.S. Senator Dianne Feinstein of California introduced the Background Check Completion Act. Senator Feinstein said would close a current loophole in the Brady Handgun Violence Prevention Act that allows gun sales to proceed if a background check is not completed after 72 hours, even if the gun buyer is not legally allowed to purchase a gun. Current law allows gun sales to proceed after 72 hours, even if background checks aren't approved. This is dangerous. It could allow criminals and those with mental illness to complete their purchase of firearms, even though it would be unlawful for them to possess them, says Feinstein. The Background Check Completion Act would require that a background check be fully completed before any gun buyers who purchases a gun from a federally licensed firearms dealer can take possession of the gun. Okay, that's not including people who are selling guns that are not federally licensed. Okay, I just wanted to note that. We're almost done here. Hang with me, okay? February 21st of 2018, just days after the February 14th, 2018 mass shooting at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida, President Trump ordered the Justice Department and Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms to review bump fire stocks. They have to review the bump fire stocks again. Devices that allow a semi-automatic rifle to be fired in fully automatic mode. They're still using it. Trump had previously indicated that he might support a new federal regulation banning the sale of such. He might. Trump had previously indicated that he might. Maybe he'll support a new federal regulation banning the sale of such devices. Quote, the president, when it comes to that, is committed to ensuring that those devices are again. I'm not going to get ahead of the announcement, but I can tell you that the president doesn't support use of those accessories, said White House Press Secretary Sarah Sanders in a press conference. On February 20th, Sanders stated that the president would support steps to raise the current minimum age for buying military-style weapons, such as the AR-15, the weapon used in the Parkland shooting, from 18 to 21. Is that really going to make any difference? It's not. It's not going to make any difference. That doesn't do anything. I think, quote, I think that's certainly something that's on the table for us to discuss and that we expect to come up over the next couple of weeks, end quote, Sanders says. Really? Really? You're going to raise the age a couple years, and that's supposed to stop these things from happening. Moving along, July 31st, 2018. U.S. District Judge Robert Lasnik in Seattle issued a temporary restraining blocking the release of blueprints that could be used to produce untraceable and undetectable 3D printable plastic guns. Oh, this is a new one here. So there are guns that can be made through a computer-controlled 3D printer. I'm late to the party. That can't be detected in what? Metal detectors. Oh, okay. Judge Lasnik's order banned the Austin, Texas-based gun rights group Defense Distributed from allowing the public to download the blueprints from its websites. Wow. There is a possibility of irreplaceable harm because of the way these guns can be made, Judge Lasnik wrote. Prior to the restraining order, plans for assembling a variety of guns, including an AR-15 style rifle and a Beretta M9 handgun, could be downloaded from the Defense Distributed website. Shortly after the restraining order was issued, President Trump tweeted, I am looking into 3D plastic guns being sold to the public. Already spoke to NRA. Doesn't seem to make sense. What does that mean?
The biggest challenge for the anti-gun lobby is asking good people to disarm when bad people won't.
Why do I carry a gun? Because if someone confronts me in a gun in an incident, God forbid, given the extremely low likelihood, you're dead. It's over. Now, the only question I have for you is, you want to defend yourself? What are you going to do if a bad guy shows up with a gun and sticks it in your face?
To stop a bad guy with a gun, it takes a good guy with a gun.
And not everyone accepts that crime goes down when gun laws are tightened.
You look at Britain, you look at Australia, every place they put gun control in effect, crime goes up.
In the wake of numerous school shootings and to the consternation of many, the NRA even argues that arming teachers is the best way to protect children from mass shootings.
Every day, young children are being dropped off at schools that are virtually wide open, soft targets for anyone bent on mass murder.
We have to harden our schools, not soften them up.
Here, the organisation promotes the Sutherland Springs church shooting, where NRA instructor Stephen Williford used an AR-15 rifle to take down a man who killed 26 worshippers. Citing examples such as Sutherland, the NRA claims that defensive gun use saves as many as 3 million lives each year. Despite these claims, the NRA can't escape one irrefutable fact. More guns equals more gun deaths, and for each year the United States fails to address its problem with guns, the problem gets worse.
The NRA said in a statement that anti-gun politicians and certain members of the press had wrongly claimed that 3D printing technology will allow for the production and widespread proliferation of undetectable plastic firearms. So they're denying it. You know, and I believe that that could have been like the last gun change, quote, gun change. It really wasn't a change. It was a looking into, and maybe we'll get back to it, and I don't know, and I don't know, a tweet. Have a good night.
We believe in the God-given right for people to have peace of mind.
In the past, the NRA has actually supported regulation and even helped write gun laws such as waiting periods and permits to carry handguns. One of the great myths surrounding the Second Amendment and the gun control debate is that gun laws can't be changed.